I met a guy who told me he'd been maxing out his ISA for the last decade, thinking he was being smart about taxes. But when I showed him what he could have saved with a SIPP instead, he just couldn't believe it. And the decision you make here could literally be worth tens of thousands over your investing lifetime. And this isn't about small differences in returns. It's about the fundamental structure of how the government taxes your wealth building efforts. As a professional trader and investor in more than 10 early stage companies, I'll go through a simple comparison on what you can use for your specific situation, which factors in the recent changes and helps you to avoid any costly mistakes because of a lack of knowledge. And before we dive into all that, let me ask you this. Did you know that there's no one size fits all because it's dependent entirely on your own situation? And we'll come back to this later and I'll show you how to view each product so you can get the best out of them. But let's start with the big question. Which account will actually save you more money on taxes? And let me tell you a story about two different people, James and Sarah, who are both investing for their future and are around the same age. Now, James decided to put his money into a stocks and shares ISA, which is fair enough because there's no tax on any capital gains here. There's no tax on dividends, no tax on any interest income. It's completely tax-free growth, which sounds great. However, Sarah decided to put her money into a SIPP instead. Now, here's where it gets interesting because James puts his £20,000 into his ISA and that's it. £20,000 invested. But Sarah, she puts her £20,000 into her SIPP, but because she's a basic rate taxpayer, she immediately gets 20% tax relief. So her £20,000 contribution actually becomes £24,000 invested. The government literally adds an extra £4,000 to her pot. And you might be thinking, but Michael, she can't access that money until she's nearly 60. And you'd be right, but let's look at the numbers over 20 years. So if we assume an 8% annual return, James's ISA grows to approximately £93,000, assuming he adds nothing else. But Sarah's SIPP, it grows to approximately £111,000. So that's almost an extra £20,000 just because Sarah used a SIPP in 1 year. And this is based on 1 year, so it doesn't actually include any extra payments either. And here's the kicker, because even when Sarah withdraws her money in retirement, if she's strategic about it, she can still minimize her tax bill because the first 25% of her pension pot is completely tax-free and then the rest is taxed as income. But if she's retired and managing her withdrawals carefully, she could be in a lower tax bracket than when she was working. The key point here is understanding the mathematics of compound interest combined with tax relief. So that upfront tax benefit in a SIPP doesn't just save you money, it gets invested and compounds for decades. Now let's talk about accessibility, because this is where a lot of people trip up. And I remember having a conversation with a follower called Mark about 2 years ago, and Mark was 42 and he'd been diligently putting money into his SIPP for years, and then life happened. So his boiler packed up, then his car needed major repairs, and his daughter needed help with university fees, which was all in the same year. Now, the issue was that whilst Mark could technically afford it, he couldn't touch a penny of that money that he had in his SIPP. And because he'd been prioritizing his SIPP over a stocks and shares ISA, once his initial savings had ran out, he didn't actually have any more money available in the short term. And this is the fundamental trade-off you need to understand, because with an ISA, your money is available whenever you need it. No penalties, no restrictions, no questions asked. And you could withdraw it today if you want to buy a car, take a holiday, or handle an emergency. And with an ISA, it's simple. You sell your investments, transfer the money to your bank account, job done. There are no tax implications, and you don't need to fill out a form. And you can even make £1 million in a stocks and shares ISA and you don't need to declare it. Your bank manager might call you up because of the amount in order to check everything, but that is a nice problem to have. With a SIPP, your money is locked away until you reach the minimum pension age, which is currently 55 but is rising to 57 in 2028, and it'll probably be a lot higher by the time I retire. There are very limited circumstances where you can actually access it early, and they aren't pleasant. So serious illness, financial hardship, that sort of thing. So you really don't want to be accessing your SIPP early because that means something's gone wrong. But here's what a lot of people don't consider. This lack of accessibility can also be a feature and not a bug. And if you think about it, how many times have you been tempted to dip into your investments for something that seemed important at the time, but really wasn't? And we've all done it, or at least I have. And the SIPP forces you to leave your money alone to compound. And I call this the forced discipline effect. So with an ISA, you need willpower to leave your investments alone. But with a SIPP, the system does it for you. But there's also another accessibility factor that's absolutely crucial. What happens when you do want to access your money? So with a SIPP, you've got various options when you reach pension age. You can take a 25% lump sum, tax-free. You can draw income regularly. You can buy an annuity, which I would strongly suggest you do not based on the numbers, but that's a topic for another video. And remember, you should do your own research, but you can also do a combination of these things. And here's the key: you can also control the timing of the tax bill. So let's say you retire with £500,000 in your SIPP. You could take £125,000 as a tax-free lump sum immediately. Then you could draw down £20,000 a year, keeping yourself in the basic rate tax band. And if you compare that to having £500,000 in an ISA, yes, it's tax-free, but you've already paid income tax on every penny you contributed to your stocks and shares ISA. So the accessibility question isn't just about when you can get your money, it's about tax planning opportunities over your entire life. So we've covered the tax implications and accessibility. Now let me give you my exact framework for deciding which account to prioritize, because the truth is the best strategy often involves both. And let me be clear, this is not financial advice. This is just my opinion, just like everyone else has one. But to start with, I'd look at step one, which is an emergency fund first. Before you put a penny into either account, make sure you've got 3 to 6 months of expenses in a boring old savings account. This can be a cash ISA or even a stocks and shares ISA, which pays out interest on your savings. And if you lost your job tomorrow, you want to have enough liquidity to pay the bills and get back on your feet. And once you've got that sorted, step two, start investing. And generally, I think a stocks and shares ISA makes more sense here because you're committing excess capital outside your savings to a tax-efficient vehicle, with the advantage that you can withdraw the money for life events such as relocating or putting a deposit down for a house, treating your family to a nice holiday, paying for private school, basically things that you need to save up for that you can access instead of all that cash being dumped into your pension. You can also make use of what's called a LISA or a lifetime ISA, and this is basically free money, as the government will top up any deposits up to £4,000 into this account by 25%. And this means that you can get £1,000 free every single year. You can open a LISA account between 18 and 40, and you can keep getting the bonus until 50. However, you can only withdraw from this account if you're 60, terminally ill, or buying your first home. But here's what a lot of people don't realize about the ISA, because some people save up for a few years to get a bonus on their deposit for a house and then stop using the account. What you can actually do is just keep the account open and keep getting the bonus. So you actually get 2 chances of withdrawal, buying your first home and then again when you turn 60. And once you've got started with this, it's step 3, consider your pension. And this is where you need to take into account your own situation, including your tax bracket. Now, if your employer offers pension matching, this is free money. For example, if you earn £40,000 a year and your employer matches your pensions up to 10%, then that's literally £4,000 of free money you could be getting into your pension on top of the tax relief. Just remember though, you can't access this money, so if you want capital that's outside of your emergency fund and stocks and shares ISA, you do need to consider this. You also need to consider the fact that you might not be able to control what your pension is invested in. Now, for most people who don't take an interest in the finances and want to leave it to professional money managers, this is fine. However, if you do want to control your own investments, then you will need a SIPP. Next, it's step 4. Consider your tax bracket and future earnings potential. If you're a basic rate taxpayer, then you get 20% tax relief on your pension. If you're a higher rate, that jumps to 40%. And so you would need to consider what you value more, tax benefits or accessibility. Step 5, you've also got to consider your age. For example, if you're 45 now, then you've only got 10 years before you can access your SIPP and get 25% of it tax-free. So do you really want to be paying tax on that money to pay into an ISA when you can be getting money in the not too distant future with 25% of it tax-free and the ability to get more out tax-free too? And it's also fine to change priorities as well. For example, if you've got plenty in your pension, but not that much in your stocks and shares ISA, you might want to start jacking up your ISA contributions. Or if you've got a big fat bonus coming and want to stay under the 60% tax trap, then you might want to prioritize your pension. The reality is you can change your strategy. And this framework isn't about choosing ISA versus SIPP forever. It's about optimizing your tax efficiency and cash flow at each stage of your financial journey. And remember, you can use both products together in order to be tax efficient. So, for example, you can contribute to a SIPP to bring yourself back down into the basic rate. Then you can use your ISA to get the 25% free. And you can also consider a stocks and shares ISA after that as well. And this example would maximize tax relief while maintaining some accessible wealth. But as I say, it's entirely down to your own situation. And I know what some people might be thinking. This is brilliant, Michael, but how do I actually implement this strategy with real brokers and real accounts? And here's the thing, knowing the theory is great, but executing it properly is where most people mess up. And they choose the wrong platforms, pay unnecessary fees, or structure their contributions in tax inefficient ways. And that's exactly why I've created this next video, to show you the clever ways normal people become millionaires so you can grow and build your wealth over the long term without making all the mistakes many people make on their road to building wealth. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in a few seconds.